enjoyed the motu today? Yeah. All right, very good. It's fun. It's quite an experience to get all that food over there and get set up every morning for that. But it gets the guys off the shift. They enjoy it actually to get out and get some fresh air and get out of the kitchens for a little while before they have to come back for dinner service. So, but it seemed out to be a beautiful day out today. No sun, plenty of sun, no clouds. The lagoon is nice and calm as well, so you're not bouncing all over the place inside the tender getting to and from the motu. So it's a nice day, very nice day. So this afternoon we have this wonderful cooking demo that we're going to do. And I have the pleasure of a guest chef this cruise on board. His name is Chef Wong. He resides in Napa Valley, California. He's a chef instructor at the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone. And it's a pleasure to have him on board. So let's all welcome Chef Wong.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Chef. Appreciate it. Just some quick background. First off, I hope you want to try some food because we're going to eat something. Just quick bio on myself. When I was first asked why did I want to get into cooking for my father, I said because I didn't want to starve. I figured at least I would eat something, and I wish I could teach my daughter that. That didn't translate that way. But anyway, prior to going to the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone, I worked primarily, or a large part of my career back home in Hawaii. I was chef at various luxury resorts where I feel very fortunate, and I had the opportunity to play and create with food and to be able to come up with ideas that was near and dear to my heart. I had no parameters from my general managers. They said, you do whatever you want to do, just manage these basic measurables, so which was really cool. I was very, very fortunate. With that said, the style of food that I like to present is food that reflects my home. I say I cook with my mother's tongue because what she cooked for me are the things that are very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very emotional when it comes to cooking. So we have an opportunity to be very intimate with each other this afternoon and allow me to share some food with you. So that's kind of what we're going to get going with. And next thing was I'm sitting and I'm trying to figure out what I was going to make for this demo, and I'm always trying to find inspiration from something. And I always say that I would like to cook something I want to eat. So usually a good time for brainstorming is when I'm a little bit hungry, because then I can think, oh, I want to get food from here or food from there. And so that's what I came up with, and that was kind of the motivation to this. The other thing is that when I cook, I always think of my most discriminating customer, which happens to be my brothers and my mother. You know, they're the ones that will never hesitate to tell me, oh, that was, my mom would say, oh, that was junk, or whatever. She tells it like it is, right? There's no filter. So that's kind of what we get. So what I'd like to do is just start off with something real simple. Everybody knows it, super popular right now. You see poke shops all over the place. I kind of want to start with that. So we can put something in your hands so you can try something, and we'll get going with that. There's a little story to everything that we're doing. And poke in Hawaiian means dice, it's two dice. And the origination of it started with the fishermen. They were hungry on the boat, so they wanted something to eat. So they would cut the tuna and steal a small portion from the tail section of the fish. They would dice it up and season it with some salt. They would call it minute poke because they would season it and serve it within a minute. Very, very quick, very simple. So I took a very simple and humble dish and I overcomplicated it. And as my mom would say in Chinese, she says it's lao he, it's real like rascal, or I wasted time. I made it really humbug. But I put things together that I kind of like, and it's a good reflection of a sense of place, which is my home. And so to that, the basic ingredients, what I have is we have ahi. I'm using different kinds of salt. So I'm using an alai salt. We talk about terroir, and the salt, the alai salt comes from the island of Kauai, and they harvest the salt, or produce it in these clay vats, so it picks up that pink color. So you're gonna taste some mineralities with that. I like to use shoyu because we have a lot of Asian influence in Hawaii, but shoyu has a lot of umami flavors in it. So when we think about tasting, we have 5 basic tastes. We have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Umami will give us that sense of savoriness on our palate. It's really important, especially as we move into more vegetable-centric dishes, that we would want to have that sense of umami for that savoriness to make things very delicious. So that's kind of what I have for my spice. Because black pepper and white pepper is not indigenous to Hawaii. What we had that grew there were bird chilies, and that's these little red chilies here. And actually, I picked these this morning at the vanilla farm when we went there. They had a lot of them. And when I asked him, hey, can I have some? He said, you can have all you want. We don't like chilies here. So I was like, oh, score. So what we do with this, with the chilies, is you hear a condiment called chili pepper water, and that's what's in this dish here. It's kind of reddish, and I'll share a couple things that would be cool to do with it. So it's not we use this just for this dish. We'll think of other things we can do with it. So what I have in this chili pepper water is there's some ginger, there's a little bit of garlic, there's some white vinegar, some salt, and what I do is I steep it in boiling water to release the capsaicin, so the peppers out of it. So what happens now is I just use the water to work as my pepper, and what it prevents from happening is, I don't know if you ever had this, is when you went to a pizza parlor and you take the red chilies and you shake the red chilies on your pizza and you start to eat it and it's not hot. So you shake a little more peppers on it and you start to eat it. It's getting hot, but not hot yet. So you shake a little more pepper, and then all of a sudden you're eating it, and you get to the end, and it's smoking hot, right? And you want some milk. And what had happened was the heat from the pizza warmed up the chilies and released the spices in it. But it doesn't happen instantaneous, so it took a while for that to happen. Well, with this, it allows me to know exactly how hot it's going to be, so I can season with it. Okay? And I'm going to go on a side note here. So what would be cool with this, on a Sunday morning when you're doing Bloody Marys for your Sunday brunch, you can use this chili pepper water to season that. That'd be kind of a cool thing. So just share a little bit. So let's get this going here. So with this poke, I have some diced tuna, and I'm going to add some onions, some diced onions. And I am of the school of thought that if I'm using onions or making my poke, I like the pieces really, really small so that I get a better, a more even seasoning throughout versus really big pieces. Then it's kind of seasoned real well, but kind of not, right? So that's the small part of it. What I also have is some ogo, and ogo is some seaweed. In Hawaiian, they call it limokohu, it would be brown. This one is a green varietal. This was procured here in Tahiti. They had gotten it from Japan. This currently, you'll start to see a large movement and influence of using sea vegetables and harvesting vegetables from the ocean, because it's a great resource to provide vegetable or produce that you can use, but it's harvesting from the ocean, and we'll pick up those kinds of flavors. So I have the ogo that I'm going to add to this. And so those are the basic items I have here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to season with a little bit of salt. We're going to season it with a little bit of shoyu, aka soy sauce. And then what I have here is I have some inomono, which is some roasted kukui nuts. So in different cultures, they'll use this for various reasons. You might hear this called candle nut, because they would use the oils for candlelight or for lamp oil. The other thing that inomono or the kukui nuts was used for is for therapeutic reasons, so they would use that as well. In cooking, we're going to use it because it's going to give us that richness, that weightiness that's in it. So you'll kind of pick up that tasting. At this point, what I want to do is I just want to taste it, and whenever I'm tasting, I always want to taste first. You know, my brain works very simplistic. It's not very. I can't think of balancing flavor on a lot of parallels at one time. So I always pick one ingredient first, or one taste that I want to focus on. The one taste that really fires our palate is going to be salt. So I want to just tell myself, do I have enough salt here first? Then after that, I can ask myself, do I taste other tastes? But without salt, your palate won't pick up sweets, or the intensity of sweets, the intensity of salt, the intensity of bitters. So that's why I say that. And then from here, now that I got enough salt, I'm going to add a little bit of chili to it and mix that up. Then the last thing I'm going to do, so when you make this, sometimes you'll see poke that people will make, and it'll look real cloudy. You know, looks like the fish was old. And it's not necessarily that the fish was old. What they did was they added the sesame oil, and they mixed it a lot with that cold fish. And when you add oil to something cold, the oil gets cloudy. And so that's something you're going to see. Sesame oil is going to be used as more as an aromatic and for the flavor properties of it. So you put just enough in there so you start to smell it, and then we're good to go. Okay. Then, what we're going to make is, before I met my lovely wife, my diet was very simplistic. I had my 5 main food groups. Alcohol was the largest. Potato chips was number 2. So when you open up my pantry, I had a lot of chips. Number 3 was just condiments in my kitchen. Number 4 food group was dairy. Doctors might say they call that penicillin because it's like things that are growing. And then the last thing I had in the produce drawer was a science project that was kind of going on. It had a life of its own. So anyway, I don't know why that matters, but so back to the chips. So what I wanted to do was, I love chips, so we're gonna make for you this canapé, and we're gonna put this poke on the chips that you can see, and we're using taro chips. And I chose taro because taro in Hawaiian is called kalo. It's the food of the gods in Polynesia. They use the root part of the vegetable, and so I used it in the chip. It's high in nutrients, and it's very good for you. The leaves we'll use later on, so we'll use the whole plant. What I did with the chips, we cut them paper thin, and we cooked it at 145 degrees Celsius, which is about 298 degrees Fahrenheit. And I cooked it at that really low temperature so that the edges don't brown too quick before I evaporated or vacated all the water out of it, so it got nice and crispy. And so you'll be able to notice that. And then chips are seasoned a little bit with some salt, and we're good to go. Here's the part where we take something simple and, you know, as my mom said, make it really humbug. So we're gonna put a little bit of sour cream that again has been seasoned. And the function of the sour cream is I wanna add some acid to it so that I have something that's really rich and savory, and I want the acid to hit your palate so that it cleanses it, so it doesn't feel overpowering on your palate, it doesn't linger too much. Then we're going to add a little bit more spice for you. And so we have a little bit of Tobiko caviar. And what the Tobiko caviar is going to do is also going to give us the spice, but it's also going to give us a little bit of texture. So you'll get that crunch with it. And the last thing is, because we're all, we eat by what we see, we'll put some green onions on it, just so it looks sexy. Then you can tell everybody who came that you had these cool chips. So that'd be the first thing that we're gonna make for you, right? And then we're gonna crank some out over here for you to give it a shot. Yeah. Anybody have any questions so far? Yes.
Is there concern about vegetables from the sea that there is about the mercury in fish? Is mercury also in plants?
That's a great question. Where they're cultivating it in areas, there is a lot of tidal flows from the Pacific currents. Okay, and if I use islands, I'll use Japan for example. As the Pacific current flow is going clockwise, so it's pushing everything up on that one side of Japan on the eastern side, and it kicks it back north. And part of it, as it comes back down around, it comes around the northern island, and it creates a circular motion. So there's a lot of nutrients that are moving around, and it's clearing out any possible large concentrations of that. So the concern is very, very low. Okay. There was something wrong. And I remember when I first had raw fish, and for me personally, it was an acquired taste. It wasn't an acquired taste, it was acquiring the texture of it. And so I kind of get it. And for me with food, I'm very analytical about it. So when I think about food and I think, okay, not what I do like, but I think about what I don't like. That's my approach to food. And when I look at what I don't like, I always ask myself, okay, well, I don't like it, so why? What is it about it that I don't like? Because I can always manipulate it or make some kind of changes that will make it desirable. But I have to be very objective about what I don't like. And so when I'm talking about food, that's kind of how I approach it. So when I tried that, so when I think of people, I don't want to try the poke, so I said, okay, well, why don't you like it? They says, oh, I don't like raw fish. I said, okay, I get it, right? So what I did in the past was, in the Japanese word for it is called tataki, where they sear it, but it's rare on the inside. But just kissing the fire changes the texture of it enough that it no longer has that feeling of the raw fish in it. Okay? So that's kind of what we got going on here. And so with this fish, what we're going to do, and I'm going to use these ahi logs, just like you would to make sashimi. And we're going to season it a little bit. And growing up, not growing up, I still love it, one of my favorite food, my favorite all-time food that I would love to eat is called saimin in Hawaii. In Japan, they call it ramen. But in Hawaii, it's saimin, and what a literal translation means wet noodles. And so you would go to these noodle shops, and one of the things you would have, because it's not typical in Japanese food to have spicy food, but in these ramen shops, they would have togarashi. So it would be a seventh spice that you would put in. And I like to play games with myself about, I gotta figure it out because I don't want to buy the little bottle and pay like $5 for it because I got all the other spices in my kitchen. And so I created a recipe for you with the 7 spices, and we kind of made our own. The only problem that when I'm making a recipe is like you end up with like a whole quart of it, so I apologize for it, but I don't know any other way to make it. It's kind of like my brothers asked me for an oxtail soup recipe one time, and so I sent them the recipe, and it was for 100 pounds of oxtail. And they said, well, how the hell am I gonna make this, right? So that's kind of what we got. So with this, I'm gonna use the togarashi. And because of the spices that are in here, which there is cayenne pepper, there's a lot of hot in it. And I love hot, but the sommeliers hate hot, right, to a certain point. So I don't want to like blow up the wine. So I use it sparingly more for the flavor and a little bit of heat that's going to be there. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to hopefully be successful with this. Okay. So I have this smoking hot pan. Sorry, I hope it on. And I'm only going to sear this for just a couple seconds on each side. Cool. And we're going to leave that be. Sorry, I'm smoking everybody out. And so, if you see how quick I cooked it, what you're gonna find is that when I slice it open, it's just gonna be seared gently on the outside, and on the inside, it's gonna be raw yet. But again, just that little bit of kissing the heat changes the structure of the protein and allows it to eat a little bit firmer and a lot different than the chips there, okay? To this, one of the things I want to do is, as I did this, I was thinking about some different things, and one of the things I wanted to do was make a simple vinaigrette dressing. And to that, what I have is I'm going to use a little bit of soy sauce, or shoyu, and to that, I'm going to also use, I have a little bit of oyster sauce. And what the difference is, why I chose to use the oyster sauce is that oyster sauce is salty, okay? But the flavor of, but the other tastes that are included in it is going to be sweetness to it. And so I'm going to get this different dynamics and flavor, and I'm going to get the sweetness from that, okay? And then what I'm going to use is some ginger. And here goes, you stuck with me, so you stuck with the story behind it. I don't like ginger, and nor do I like gin. Right? Those two things don't go well for me. Bad memories, childhood memories when I was a little kid. My grandma's secret potion for a sore throat was ginger juice with gin, and you gotta gargle with it. And so forever, I can't handle that. Okay? Well, today you're gonna have ginger. No gin, but you got some ginger. But as I started to work with the flavors, one of the things that I like about ginger was maybe the flavor. What I don't like about ginger is the texture of it. And so what I did was I used a microplane for it. And I microplaned the ginger, and I really broke down all the fibrous materials. A microplane is, the culinary gods are thankful to the carpenters, because a microplane is fashioned after a rasp, a wooden rasp that carpenters would use to shape wood. And so that's kind of where they get it. And so it breaks it down. So you get this ginger that is more just flavor, but not a lot of the fibrous materials in it. I also have some garlic here, and then I have some green onions. And what you're gonna notice is that with the cooking that I do, I try to use the same ingredients over and over and over, but in different proportions. And the reason for that is, when I first started cooking and I went back to Hawaii and I was doing these demos and stuff, my mom would always bust on me. She would say, every time you do a demo, I buy an ingredient, you only do one thing with it. I buy equipment, cheesecake ring, I only do one thing with it. And she says, look at my pantry, it looks like William Sonoma. And I don't know what else to do with it, but for that one thing. And so, with that said, I try to come up with as many different things for the one recipe. Then I feel that we've been successful in teaching you how to use it and different ways to use those ingredients. And so, shoyu, so far we use it two different ways. In this one, we're going to use it in a dressing. What I also have is I'm going to have some olive oil in here. You can use any neutral oil. And what I can smell already in here is, I can smell the ginger in here that's going at it. Now, there's something I learned. There was a chef who came from Mexico, and we were at the school, and he was known for making ceviche. So this was like a mind-blowing thing that he did. Was he says, when you cut your limes, I only want you to cut it just on the panels. Don't cut it down the middle, because the middle has the pith, and that pith has a lot of bitters in it. And so by just doing that, we just use this part of the lemon, you get this really, lime, you get this really nice lime flavor, but we eliminate the bitterness to it that comes with it. And another tip for you is that when you're doing this, is that don't squeeze your lime juice until you need it, right? Because as it sits, it starts to oxidize and it gets bitter. Okay? In this dish, what I'm also wanting to do is to really get that acidity in here. I really want the flavors of the lime. I cut a little bit more. I would leave more limes, but I don't have any margarita mix, so I'm going to use it in here. Okay. Great. And you know, one of the painstaking things that you have to do when you're cooking, and you got to take one for the team. So taste everything you cook. Taste often, you know, because otherwise, once I give it out to you, I can't take it back. Right? So the same thing as you're tasting with your friends. Don't be afraid to taste everything. All right. All right, we're working here. Cool. And what I have here is a simple salad. And what I have some red onions. What I did with the red onions is I soaked them in water, cold water, ice water, and I rinsed it a couple times because I'm trying to get that harshness, that bite out of it. I still like some of the onion flavor, but I don't want so much of it so that it's offensive. I always try that if I'm eating onions, that I feed my wife onions too. Same thing with garlic. So you know, same with you. You know, make sure you share the aromas with your partner. All right. So I also have some carrots that I julienne, and I have some red bell peppers. And I'm making a real simple salad. I have some snow peas, and this too, after I cut them really fine, I soak them in water to vacate or get rid of the seeds that might be floating around. And then we're good to roll. Then I'm just gonna mix my salad up. And what's going to happen here is as the shoyu hits the vegetables, it's gonna push the water out, right? We all kind of know a little bit of science there. So the salt hits it, the water comes out, and it's gonna give you a little bit saucier dressing at the end. Okay, I said saucier, not sassier. Okay, cool. So this is what I have, and so now something that we want to think about here is that when we're eating this, when I'm plating this, I'm thinking for my customer is that I create texture, but I need moisture. Okay, and so the moisture is going to come from the vegetables or this simple salad that we have. And so with that said, I want to make sure that it's nice and wet. Okay. Now with my tuna, I'm just going to take it. We take the end piece, and you can see how nice and rare. We have nice even color around. And all I'm going to do is just make a simple salad garnish on my plate. Sorry, breathing really hard, huh? And I kind of do this on purpose. I'm right-handed, but I grew up with brothers, and so dinner was kind of war, right? So you gotta fend for yourself. And so with that, I don't know if anybody knows this, but you know, I always have a knife in my left hand, even though I'm right-handed, but at dinner, my knife is on my left hand, my fork's on my right hand, and I never put them down. And so when I got into cooking, and I got to plate food, I do it that way. So you may notice that if you had a knife and a fork and you ate the food I made, you're gonna go, oh, everything's kind of backwards here, because, you know, I'm supposed to hold the fork in my left hand and the knife in my right hand, but everything's going the opposite way all of a sudden. So I kind of play head games, but that's what makes it fun, and you know, we'll see if people pick it up. And then so I have my tuna there, and then the last thing I have is I wanted, you know, I love this theme of chips, so I fried some wonton chips, so wonton pea, and I cut them really, really fine. And so we're going to put that as a garnish on top, so you have that texture with it. All right. So we got that for you. Chef, I got to give you this part. And I'll take the tone. You can I got a piece of ahi here you can have. I'll cut for you. Anyone have any questions so far? Nothing, can ask anything. It's an open book. I made sure it did, because I didn't want to drink it anymore, you know? Yeah, I never forget that. That's from when I was little, all the way until, you know, I think I was like 8th grade.
How do you know you're getting quality fish?
How do I know I'm getting quality fish? That's a great question. I'm going to speak from the U.S. perspective, because that's where I'm based out of. One of the most important things when it comes to procuring fish is this relationship with my fish supplier. We call them our fishmongers. They're kind of the eyes on the ground for us. In Honolulu, or in most places in Hawaii, also in San Francisco, we have a fish market and a fish auction. And so once they know what I'm looking for, that's what they're going to go after. What's really interesting is a fish vendor, a fishmonger, will also protect his or her investment. And what do I mean by that is they'll protect the market price. And so if, you know, because I bought my tuna and it came in today and tomorrow the price of tuna is going to go down, there's no way he's going to let that happen, especially around Christmas time. And so what he will do, whether they need the fish or not, they're going to bid it up, because it's bidded at an auction, so it keeps the prices flat. Good or bad, but that keeps it kind of consistent. Back to good fish versus how do I know I'm getting good fish? So I'm really trusting my vendor. When it hits my back door, there's some things that I'm looking for still, and I'm going to check it in. Even though I develop a relationship with all of my vendors and my fish vendors, I will still go through these steps. Number one, I'm looking for temperature of the fish. I need that core temperature of that fish to be 32 degrees. So when it lands on my dock, if it's we call it drawn, where the guts are removed, but it's a whole fish. In the belly of the fish, it should be packed with ice, and it should be packed with crushed ice. So there's the most contact surface there. The fish should be packed in ice the way they swim. So if it's a round fish, it'd be swimming packed like they're swimming, and there should be ice packed around it. If it's a flat fish, the pigmented sign should be up, and it should be at about a 60-degree angle so the water doesn't puddle on the fish, and the same thing would be happening. That'd be number one. The next thing we do is the nose test, because you're gonna smell bad fish before you see bad fish. So we're gonna smell it, all right? The next thing we're gonna do is blood oxidizes. And so what we'll do is we'll open up the gills, and we look at the gills to see it should have a deep maroon color. I would look in the belly because it's drawn, and right around the spine part of the belly, I would see if the blood had oxidized as well. So it gives me some idea of time. The next thing I would do is if there's scales on it, I would take the scales and I'd pull them off. And if they're fresh, it should be hard to pull them out. If I run my hand from tail to head and the scales fly off, that's a good indicator they're not fresh. The other thing that I would do, and this is the last test I would do, is I would press on the flesh. It should be kind of spongy, it should bounce back. But be gentle with it, don't, because you can stick your finger in. But so those are the basic tests that we're looking at. I think if I can just simplify it, it would be by smell would be number one, and number two would be by feel. Should be nice and firm. Those are the truest tests for fish. Oh.
Do you use much New Zealand fish? Do you report use or even the
New Zealand, yes, and there is. I grew up in this in cooking in this era where I'll try to use things local, things that are regional, and things that are seasonal. That's my food philosophy. But some things I will use, and if it is from New Zealand, the one fish that we're using is a fish called Ora salmon, which is this farm-raised salmon, and it is dynamite. This is probably the #1 farm-raised salmon that is being used for sushi bars because it's so rich and has a buttery flavor to it. Outside of that, there was a time where I was using New Zealand lamb, but with the shift, one of the things that we're doing is trying to use things local. So I'm using lamb from Sonoma at the Institute. That's kind of what we're using. The other part with lamb is when we were using it, we always used the rack lamb, but we said, well, what about the rest of the animal? You know, you've got these lamb that are running around and the midsection's gone, right? But so we're trying to use the whole parts, legs, the loins, the shoulders, and what have you. So long story short, that's, you know. So again, it's more philosophical, trying to use things local. Yeah. But I will say, I have used stuff from New Zealand, and when I did, it's always been great. Yeah. Great. The last thing that I want to do is we use the chips or the taro root for the chips. And so what I wanted to do was to use the leaves from the taro. And so the leaves kind of look like this. And you know, we talked about trying to use the whole plant. When we think of agriculture and things that we're doing, we say, oh, I use things seasonal. Well, but I really don't use it seasonal. So what do I mean by that? Is if we take a tomato plant, and a tomato plant is kind of this bell curve, correct? From when it starts to grow to when it's ripe to when it starts to get botanically mature, and then it starts to die off. And we don't use the plant in all stages. We only use it for the fruit, you know. And so same thing here is one of the things that we did culturally growing up in Hawaii. We use every part of the taro. So you see the bottom part, I use it as a chip because that's what I like. But I grew up as a kid having poi, which was a starch that was very dense, and so that was one way of using it. The other part was the leaves. The leaves, you would normally see them a couple ways. You would see them is they would take these big leaves and they would take a couple of them together, and what they would do is they would wrap pork or fish in here with a little bit of salt, and then they would tie it, they would roll it up like this. They'll wrap it in tea leaves so it looks like a little pouch, and they would steam it. Closest thing I could think to that would be the French term in cooking, we call it a papillote. So it kind of steams it in here, but the leaves also start to braise, so it's kind of, when I think of American region of cooking, I think of this very similar to collard greens, and it's a cooking green, and so you cook it till it's very, very tender. So kind of two things that are happening in it. And so I just wanted to show you the leaf. One of the things I did with this was I did luau style. And luau style in Hawaii, we would cook it, and sometimes you would see it with squid or chicken. It's cooked in coconut milk, so think of creamed spinach, but it's with the taro leaves. And so that's kind of what I did for here. So because of time, so I had that cooked ahead. It's really, really tender, and so when I cook this, I always tell people to cook it by what you taste and not cooking it by what you see. Because if you cook by what you see, you're gonna say, oh, I want it nice and bright green, but then it's not gonna be very tender, and that's not good. So whenever I'm cooking collards or any cooked braising greens, we cook it till it's tender versus what it looks like. All right. The other thing that I did with the taro leaves that is a caution to you is that if it's undercooked, it's gonna feel like your throat gets scratchy. All right, and so what we did with this, it was kind of a two-step. So with this one, what I did was I blanched it, then we shocked it, then we cooked it. And in the cooking here, what we have is we have some, we sauteed a little bit of ginger, a little bit of garlic, then we added the collard greens to it, and we hit it with some coconut water and some cream of coconut. And we cooked it, and so what we wanted to get was this savory and salty, savory and sweet flavor to it. So that's kind of what you got here. We have the fish that I'm using, before I burn everybody up here. Okay, so we have the fresh fish that we were fortunate to get with some palm fruit, which is an emperor fish. It's very firm, and I'm just looking at it, and I look at the texture of it. It's going to be a firmer type texture. It looks and reminds me very similar to ono or wahoo. So one of the things I want to be careful with is that I don't want this to, I don't want to overcook it, because then it's going to be very, very dry, right? One thing that I want to do as well is I want to create texture in the cooking process. So whenever I'm cooking fish, one of the challenges that we're going to have is that if the pan is not hot, when I'm sauteing it, when the pan is not hot, the fish will stick to it immediately. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is something else that's going to cause it to stick is maybe my pan's hot enough, but if I don't dry it off well and there's too much water, that would also cause it to stick. Looking for a pair of tongs. I can use that. Thank you, Chef. And so that's something that I also did. Also with fish, when I think of eating fish, a lot of times it's seasoned on the outside, but not seasoned on the inside. So what I did with the fish was I seasoned it ahead of time, and I allowed the salt to penetrate, so it gets to the inside of the fish. Okay. So wish me luck here, everybody. Keep your toes crossed so it doesn't stick. Okay. I'm using extra virgin olive oil. You can kind of smell that. It's kind of what I grab. I think of fat in a very simplistic, well, I think of ingredients very simplistic. And in my case, what I'm thinking is that it is, fat is fat. And so the different fat has different flavors. And so in this case, we're gonna get a little bit of that bitterness that's gonna come out from the oil. What I have to be careful with here is I have to be careful that I don't burn the oil, okay? Because there's, in extra virgin olive oil, there's still some solids that are in there. And so that's what causes it to burn. you'll hear chefs say, oh, you can't deep fry with extra virgin olive oil. Well, you can, but you just have to monitor what is the smoking point of that oil. Something else that I'm doing is that when I'm cooking, I listen to a couple things. I'm listening to the sound, like what does my pan sound like? And so I want the volume to have that popping, but I don't want it to be so aggressive that it's, I hear it really loud. The other part is I don't want it to be silent, because if it's silent, then it's going to be steamy, and it's not going to be sauteing, right? So that's something I want to be careful with. The next thing I'm doing is I'm visually looking at the fish, and you can see in the pan, you can see the protein start to coagulate as it comes up the side. And my goal here is I don't have any smoke that's coming out, so I know I can't easily, it's not possible for me to burn it at this point. So I'm leaving it there so I get good crust on it. Okay? Then the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to do, as you see it, I'm just going to turn it over real quick. I'm going to turn it off. And I'm just going to let this fish rest. And we're going to finish a couple things up here. Then the other part that I have, other thing that we have is I made a sweet potato puree, very much like whipped potatoes. Sweet potatoes are very common in the Pacific because of our soil type. We can't grow regular potatoes, pomme de terre, I think that's what it's called in French, but you won't see regular potatoes grown in Hawaii, so sweet potatoes are something that's grown a lot. What I've done with mine is, I would say that my food is try to be healthy, it's fat-free, and it's not that I don't have fat in it, I have a lot of fat in it, it's just we're not charging you for the fat for today, so that's hence it's fat-free. I'm using the puree potato, and if you look at it, I left it super thin. And it's going to be rich, it's going to have that sweet, it's going to have that saltiness to it, but it also has that silky consistency to it. So it's going to coat your palate to be really decadent. Also, I'm using it kind of as a sauce. So I'm using my starch both as a starch component, but also as a sauce component as well. So I don't have a traditional sauce that I'm going to have here. The other thing I'm going to do is in Hawaii, one of the things you would have is lomi salmon. So it's salted salmon that's been cured. That's something that came with the explorers. But what I'm going to do is leave everything out. I'm going to add everything except for the salmon. And so I have some tomatoes that are diced. What I did was I used only the flesh of the tomatoes on the outside. I didn't use the inside part where there's all the seeds. I also didn't want the water in there as well. To that, I'm going to add a little bit of diced onions, a little bit of shaved green onions to it. We have a little bit of salt, and we need a little bit of pepper in here, just enough to just kind of season it. So the tomatoes work also as another vegetable component for my dish. So that's what we're using. So trying to incorporate as much of that as possible in here. So on my plate, so I'm going to start with my sweet potatoes. And what we did with the sweet potatoes is a good friend of mine, Dr. Ali Bazari, did a science project, and he's a food scientist. So what we learned is that we took the sweet potatoes, threw them in the oven, turned the oven on. So we started with a cold oven, and what it allowed the cooking process to do is that as it starts to cook, it's allowing, as the potato is cooking, the carbohydrate chains are breaking up, and so naturally we end up with a sweeter sweet potato through that cooking process. And it would work with any kind of root vegetable. So this idea of preheating your oven and throw your potatoes in, or your sweet potatoes in it, what you can do, and this is done by research, you can actually just take your vegetables, throw them in the oven, then turn them on and cook them for the allocated amount of time, and you get that sweetness to it. All right. The next thing I have here is I have the taro leaves. And so what you're gonna find here, and kind of the components that we have here, all represents things that I would find in the luau. And so I have the taro leaves that we're gonna use. Then we have the fish that goes on it. And then the last thing I have is going to be my lomi tomatoes that goes on it, because you would normally have this as your garnish, or have this as a salad or component in a luau with that salted salmon. And so that's that. You have any questions? You guys have been super quiet. I'm really nervous.
So you use specifies unsalted butter. Can you use salted as well, or just cut back on salt?
Question, I don't know if everybody heard, is salted butter versus unsalted butter. From a chef's perspective, and chef, you might echo in on this, whenever I'm seasoning food, I don't want somebody to take the salt out of my hands. And so if there's salt already in the butter, I lose that control. And I'm a control freak, so I'm not big on that. So I prefer using unsalted butter. We all would prefer that, using unsalted butter. Then it's a lot more predictable, because salted butter from manufacturer to manufacturer, region to region, could have different amounts of salt, so it's really unpredictable. So that's kind of what we prefer. And even in, not just in the savory section, but also in bacon and pastry as well. We use unsalted butter. Do you have a question back here?
That's right, your lomi tomato, what, preferred tomato, you care?
Whenever it comes to produce, my first choice is whatever's in season. Okay, because whenever we're cooking and we're using something in season, it's really easy for us to cook. We don't have to season a lot. I try not to use tomatoes out of season. If I am, and I'm forced to, I might use cherry tomatoes during the colder times, but I try to avoid it. We're big on trying to preserve things, so making our own canned tomato sauce or canned tomatoes, that may be something we would use.
Well, here, onion sweet roux.
Brunoise.
Yeah, what is that? I'm not familiar with that. I see in the.
Very small dice. A brunoise, different schools, it's about 1/8 of an inch square.
Wow,
And someone would say, can I just throw them in the food processor? That's a legit question. And you could, but whenever you push it into a food processor, the blade is not very sharp. And so we smash the onions more than we chop the onions. And so we end up having a lot of water separation. And so that's the undesirable part. Yeah. Any other questions? We all good? Chef, question down here? None? Awesome. I want to thank Chef for hosting us here, the opportunity to be here to share food with you is a great pleasure and an honor on my part. And so thank you very much for spending your time. You could have done a lot of other things, like hang out at the pool, get a cocktail, but you decided to come down here and suffer through this session with me, and I thank you very, very much. With that said, you all have to enjoy the rest of your afternoon, have a great evening, and enjoy the rest of your cruise. Thank you very much.